you play, it's like a Bugs Bunny character in a sense. Like there are these trickster characters in mythology that are troublemakers. Are you surprised that you ended up in the domain of comedy, making movies? You're a documentary star now.
I saw the first cut, so he warned me going in that this is going to be jarring. I was devastated by how much I hated it. This is the worst thing. It's an embarrassment. Our careers are over.
You talked about exposing people and exposing fraud and a certain amount of righteous judgment. You know, I've been thinking hard about the use of anger. It's very physiologically activating. It's one of the sources of energy that I draw on. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the Daily Wire too, since we're both part of it, because I'm struggling in a sense with Hello, everybody. I had the privilege, the opportunity to sit down today with one of my fellow Daily Wire creatures, Matt Walsh. And you should know Matt, I suspect. And if you don't, well, then you could. He was the force behind two of the most successful documentaries in the last few decades. What is a woman? That's a question he actually answers. And am I racist? Two deep and soul-searching questions, apparently. I don't know, are those the cardinal questions of the last 10 years? Maybe they were. Anyways, Matt has a remarkable facility to put his finger on central issues in the culture war, to lay them out, to inquire into them, and to show their appalling underbelly. And so we talked about that. We talked about how he managed that. We talked about his role as a comedian, a straight-faced, Buster Keaton-like, monotone-speaking, troublemaking comedian, a social critic, a writer, a director, now an actor in these documentaries, playing a role, playing a character, what that was like, what he learned, his ambitions for the future. We talked about the political moment and what the implications are of the Trump victory for conservative commentary of the sort that Matt particularly specializes in and that I delve into from time to time. And we touched on some more topical issues. In the last week, Matt has been involved in a rather contentious war of words with a number of people online, including James Lindsay, who I did a podcast with just a week or so ago on the issue of the woke right. And so we delved into the controversies that are erupting on the conservative side of the spectrum, and that's the podcast. So join us for an update into Matt Walsh's life and another glimpse into the culture war and a bit of a slice of what's currently controversial. Hey, Matt, we were supposed to meet in person today. What the hell happened?
Yeah, we were. Sorry about that. This is flying American. My flight got delayed by 5 hours with no explanation, and so now I'm still here. So that's the world of flying these days.
Yeah, typical uppity customer wanting explanations and everything.
Yeah, and they're not very forthcoming with them. So
no, they certainly aren't. Yeah. No, they certainly aren't. And I think the situation is even worse in Canada. I presume a 50% delay rate at the moment. And the U.S. seems better, but it's still hit and miss.
Yeah, it's really bad. I was just on a flight last week, and we lost cabin pressure, and we had to divert and do an emergency landing. And every time I try to get on a plane now, this is what it's like. It's the airline.
Yeah, well, Matt, who needs merit?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. That's something we could talk about too. You know, there are actually technical definitions of merit, by the way, that psychologists were bound to consider when they were doing such things as generating practices for hiring. And even though those are instantiated in the law, in many ways they've been thrown aside. So anyways, before we get into any of that, why don't you tell me what you're up to? And I want to talk to you a little bit about the Daily Wire too, because since we're both part of it, because I'm struggling in a sense with trying to figure out exactly what the proper role is of our style of communication on the political side, given the new political reality in the United States. So tell me about what you're up to first, though. What's going on with you?
Yeah, we have, of course, aside from the daily show that I do every day, we've got several projects that are in very early stages right now, at least 3 And I'm really excited about them. The nature of the kind of projects we do means that I can't talk about them at all. So there's always a lot of secrecy that goes into it, which I understand is frustrating for the audience, especially I start missing shows here and there because I'm out filming something. But at this point, I think I can say the audience also knows that it'll be worth it in the end. That if I say I'm working on a secret project, I will deliver at some point in the future, and it'll be worth it. So we're working on that again, and yeah, I'm once you get into it and once you start doing, at least for me anyway, having done podcasting for years, and then I did the first movie, What Is a Woman, and then Am I Racist came out last year. But once I experienced that, what it's like to do a piece of long form, entertainment content that you work on for months and months and months, put a lot of time into it, you put it out into the world, and it makes an impact. People watch it, and it makes an impact that lasts longer than 30 seconds, which is usually how long, like a podcast lasts. Once you experience that, you want to keep doing it. You can't let it go. So there's plenty more to come. I wish I could say more about it, but that's it for now.
We're dealing with a pattern of misbehaviors with our son.
Our 13-year-old throws tantrums.
Our son turned to some substance abuse.
Rules consistently applied with minimal force and plenty of patience.
Yeah, well, let's delve into the previous projects a bit. So you already named them, What Is a Woman and Am I Racist? I thought those were both spectacularly well-timed and also pitched at exactly the right public level. You have a real knack for taking a topic that is, in a sense, intellectual and philosophical at its core, but investigating that in a way that makes it sufficiently accessible to people so that you can ensure a very wide audience and commercial success and also communicate something. So why don't you bring everybody up to date with regard to What Is a Woman and Am I Racist? What level of success, what level of reach did those projects bring? And what opportunities has that opened up for you on the documentary and film horizon?
Yeah, I mean, we were blessed in both cases that they were extremely successful. I mean, sometimes it's hard to put it into perspective when you're talking about success for a piece of content that's on the platform behind a paywall versus in theaters. And What Is a Woman was only on the platform, and we never released it in theaters. It was a huge, massive hit for us. And then at the time, the biggest hit the Daily Wire had ever had, when you look at just number of views and subscribers and everything else. And then Am I Racist comes out, we decide to pursue the theatrical release with that. And there was always the question of how is that going to affect. We wanted to put it in theaters. We wanted to reach a wide audience. We want to kind of play in that. We want to be on that playing field. If you really want to engage with the culture, you have to go where the culture is happening. And it is still happening in movie theaters also. So we wanted to do that. We weren't sure how that would impact the success on the platform. Would everybody go see it in theaters and they're not interested in watching on the platform? We weren't sure. It was worth trying. And what we found is that for a documentary, it was massively successful in theaters. It was the number one documentary box office wise of this decade. It's top 35, top 30 for documentaries in the box office all time. And then on the platform, it became the new biggest hit the Daily Wire had ever had, even surpassing What Is a Woman. And what we found is that actually there's putting in theaters, you access a large audience. It also is its own kind of marketing engine. Now more people know about it, and they're going to want to go find it. So it's been incredible, and I think the main opportunity it opens up for me anyway is doing another one. And once you kind of have to prove yourself. Especially for us, and I know going into this, I never made a movie before What Is a Woman. You got to prove yourself. You got to prove you can do it. Then you got to keep proving yourself. And if you have success with one film, then that kind of buys you the next one. And so we're so far so good, And so we're gonna keep going.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. I mean, obviously, the first one is by far the most difficult. Like the first customer that you have in a new business or your first book sale, anything unlikely, but it's very unlikely that a film ever gets made. And then it's within the category of films that get made, it's very unlikely that they'll be successful. And I would say that's particularly true for documentary releases theatrically. And it's also really good to hear that, and I think this is a lesson too, in a way, that it's not a zero-sum game, right? You can, because the potential market is so huge, the fact that you did release in theaters, as you said, had a boosting effect in the other avenues that you wanted to walk down effectively, right? To bring subscribers, for example, to the Daily Wire and viewers. And so your theatrical release was nothing but additional icing on the cake, hey?
Yeah, that's what it was. And you're right, that's once you get into trying to make a movie, you start to appreciate what I didn't appreciate before, which is that this is so incredibly hard to do. And there are so many ways it can go wrong because unlike any other art form that you can think of, or unlike most other art forms, it involves so many people. And and we're doing documentaries. So with documentaries, it's a much smaller team, but it's still a large team. We have our director, producers, we have, the camera crew. We have, you've got your people that are on development, then there's the production side, and the editing side, and then the distributors, and then people marketing, because how are you going to get people to even watch it? They have to know that it exists. And so you've got all these different teams, and if anything goes wrong along that chain, if anyone screws up, then it could derail the entire thing. And that's how you end up. So I started to appreciate, okay, well, how can you make a movie that's good but doesn't do well? Well, that's actually very easy to do, especially if you screw up on the marketing end, that can happen, or the distribution end. What, to me, the bigger mystery that I always wondered is, how do bad movies exist? How did no one notice before this thing came out how bad it was? And I started to understand that too. Now, fortunately, I think both of our movies are really good. But when you're in the process of making it, you understand that, I could see how this could, it feels good to me right now. It feels like we're making a good movie, but it's got to go through so many hands before it finally makes it out into the world. And if they don't steward it the right way, then we could end up with a bad movie that felt good at the time. And so I have developed an appreciation for that. And I'm a little bit more forgiving now also of, only a little bit, but a little bit more forgiving of movies that I watch that don't quite nail it, because I can see how that might happen, even with all the best intentions.
Well, it's also hard, I think, to bring the proper critical eye, or have the proper critical eye brought to your work, say, by your friends. I find that as soon as I'm personally involved with someone, maybe I've solved this in relation to my own work, but as soon as I'm personally involved with someone, if they send me something to evaluate, I find it quite difficult to evaluate it as soon as that personal connection is there, right? Because you lose that necessary distance. So, look, you did 2 movies in a row that did well, and they were similar in quality and format, I would say. They were markedly of the same approach. What role did you play in constructing and supervising the editing, and in overseeing the people who were involved to make sure that it stayed on track? Because as you intimated, you don't need very many weak links in the chain before you've got quite the catastrophe on your hands.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm very involved in all my projects. Part of that is the way I feel about it is I'm on camera. I have to own this thing. If it fails, if it's bad, it's going to, primarily the embarrassment's going to go to me. So if it is going to fail, then I want to actually know that it was my fault. But to be embarrassed by something being bad, that where I don't want to look at it and say, well, that wasn't even my fault, because that makes me feel helpless. I want to be able to know that I have ownership of this thing. So I'm very involved every step of the way on the production end of things. Now, we do also have a director, Justin Folk, who directed the last 2 films, who's an excellent, incredibly talented director. So I can kind of defer to him. So he's actually the one running all of this. And I don't have to take a real kind of management role, which is good, because that's not my strong suit at all. But on the creative end of things, I like to be very, very involved the whole way. And you're also right about I think this is one of the hazards of not just movies, but doing anything creatively is just getting anyone around you who will be honest with you and give you real feedback. That becomes a real problem in a creative world. Now, I have one major advantage, which is I do have the person who's the very closest to me on earth, who's my wife, will actually be brutally honest, which I've realized is like a major. It's like an ace up my sleeve. It's a major.
Oh, that's for sure.
Weapon.
Well, that's a whole additional brain, Matt.
Right, exactly. Which also makes me. It makes me so with both movies. I didn't show them to her until they were very far along, because I was terrified to show them to her because I knew that she'd be honest, and if she didn't like it, I didn't know how I would handle that. Just because it's devastating to put that much effort and heart into something, and then the person closest to you doesn't like it. But in both cases, she watched it and she loved both of them. And once I knew that, I felt fine. I had a lot of confidence going into the premiere and everything.
So you worked on, two questions. I want a technical question first, because I think this would be useful for the viewers and the listeners. Do you want to distinguish between the roles of producer, director, and editor? You know, these terms are bandied about all the time, but that doesn't mean that everybody who encounters them knows exactly what they mean. And so if, in your experience now, how would you characterize the role of a producer?
Yeah, that's interesting, because a producer is an interesting title, because that could be someone who does nothing at all or someone who does everything, at least in my experience. Now, I've been blessed to work with really good producers, but let's face it, you can't just put your name on something as a producer and do almost nothing towards it. But in a perfect world, a producer is kind of involved at an overseeing level at every step along the way. Create from the creative, the development, the production of the thing into the post-production. And so they're going to have a voice and a say every step. And they kind of have this bird's eye view of the whole project.
And they're often arranging funding too, eh?
Right, funding, the logistics. So you rely on the producers, especially for the films that we've done. The logistics are a major challenge of, because we're going out and we're making a movie, we're telling a story, but not everybody on camera quite knows what the story is. So not everyone's kind of in on the joke. In fact, nobody is but me. So that creates all kinds of logistical problems. And so we need brilliant producers that know how to make that work. And we do have that. Then the editors are going to be on the back end after you've already produced it. Now their job, now that we have the thing, we filmed it, now they got to cobble it together. And that's always a challenge in a film. I know with the kinds of films that we make, again, it's an even greater challenge because we have so much raw material. And now here's all this raw material. Now you have to sculpt it into something. You got all this clay, sculpt it into something. And then the director is the person, is the captain of the ship, is the person steering the ship this whole way.
Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, supporting everyone from established brands to entrepreneurs just starting their journey. You can create your professional storefront effortlessly with Shopify's extensive library of customizable templates designed to reflect your brand's unique identity. Boost your productivity with Shopify's AI-powered tools that craft compelling products, descriptions, engaging headlines, and even enhance your product's photography, all with just a few clicks. Plus, you can market your business like a pro without hiring a team. Easily develop and launch targeted email campaigns and social media content that reaches customers wherever they spend their time, online or offline. If that's not enough, Shopify offers expert guidance on every aspect of commerce, from inventory management to international shipping logistics to seamless return processing. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.com/JBP. Go to shopify.com/JBP. Again, that's shopify.com/JBP.
And the editor, the editing function I find particularly interesting. When I'm writing, I learned to edit from writing, and I write a lot more than I keep. And I probably edit for half the time that I write. Like I separate the functions. There's a writing function and an editing function. And I've become much more effective over the years at writing a better and better first draft. But editing, and I've also seen this with my other ventures, with Peterson Academy, for example, and with the Daily Wire as well, how important with the documentaries that I've made for the Daily Wire, how important editing is. I mean, an editor can make or break a project, to time things properly with the music, to select only the best from all the excess footage, to make it stylish and punchy and well timed. And so were you fortunate in your editorial team as well? And what kind of editorial role did you play?
Very fortunate editorial team. My role in the editing was pretty minimal. More involved than someone like me would normally be involved in something like that, but it was still, editing on a film like this is hours and hours and hours and hours every day in the editing bay. And that's not what I was doing. I kind of, maybe like once a week checking in, and especially when you're dealing with these really, once you get through the lion's share of the edit and you're down to, maybe you want the movie to be an hour 40, you're down to like an hour 50. And so you got 10 minutes to cut. And at least in the past two movies, that's where I'm the most involved, because most of the hard work's been done. Now we just got to figure out, there's like a couple things we got to take out of this. And here are a few candidates for what we might cut. And that's where I'm involved in helping to make those decisions. And I certainly got an appreciation for how important the editing is, because I can tell you that in both movies, I saw the first cut and I hated the first cut in both movies. I was devastated by how much I hated it. And of course, our director, Justin, he warned me, because I'd never seen a first cut of a movie before. So he warned me going in that this is going to be jarring, because you've never seen a movie that, like, you've never seen, if you're just a civilian, you've never seen what the rough draft of a movie is like, and I hadn't. And so I had that warning, but still I went in and I watched the rough cut on both movies, and I thought, well, this is terrible. This is the worst thing. It's an embarrassment. Our careers are over. And then I got to be talked off the ledge a little bit. And as we went through the editing process, once we get through it, then you start to see, okay, like things that's little cuts, like, okay, this scene goes on 3 seconds too long. And when you cut that 3 seconds off, it goes from a scene that doesn't work at all and is terrible to a scene that is perfect. And the score, the music too, of course, is so important in a way that you don't quite. And there are little moments here. Maybe we just need to add a little pause there. Maybe we need to take a pause out of that spot. Just these little things that you don't appreciate how important those are to the final product.
Yeah, well, it's like timing a joke. I mean, all the words have to work, and not too many. And so, yeah, well, and you say there's something interesting about, in terms of assessing the creative process there too. It's like, one of the things that was striking about your documentaries is that you were inspired, in my estimation, by an important question in both cases, right? And you actually put them as questions. And the root word of question is quest, and when I'm lecturing in public on my tour, I always have the question in mind before I step on the stage, right? And so you served as a sponge on the cultural side, as far as I'm concerned, sort of soaking up the zeitgeist and distilling down the central political concerns. And you landed deep down in those concerns in both cases. The first concern was, well, to what degree is the notion of sex itself something that's only culturally created? To what degree is it biological? How does that influence our sense of reality itself? And is there a role for secondary elements of sexual identity like gender? And that was a hot button topic, to say the least, right? And then your documentary laid out that question, and you did the same thing with, am I a racist? That's right. Well, what does it mean to be a racist? And if we establish the meaning, to what degree does that apply to me? And those are reasonable questions. People have their own in-group preferences. We're somewhat novelty averse, but also curious. Precisely what it means to be a racist is a complicated issue. And so you had those questions in mind. It might be useful for everybody watching and listening to think hard about what your comments about the first draft meant. Because one of the things I do when I'm teaching people to write, and we've built this into some new software that we've developed on called Essay, is encourage people to start with a question and then to write way more than they need, right? And that gives you some creative space to lay out the exploration. And I suspect that's what you saw when you saw the first draft of the movie, the first version. It's like, it's kind of all over the place, but that doesn't matter if you can edit it down. Like, it's so, there's a different, the part of your brain that produces and the part that edits are separate. And if you get them both operating at once, like you try to write the perfect sentence, let's say, then they interfere with each other. You can't produce and you can't edit. So you want to separate the production function and overproduce, and then you want to edit. And that sounds like exactly what happened to you when you were going through the first rough drafts of the movie. But obviously the gold was there.
Yeah, that is what happened. I think it's also, you're trying to figure out what exactly is this thing? What is it? And in particular with Am I Racist, that was a major question. I mean, we had the question, as you point out, for the title that determines what we're exploring. But then there was the creative question of what kind of movie is this exactly? And I think with the first cut, we had something that was sort of straddling the line between a more traditional documentary and something that was a bit more sort of gonzo and Borat and performative and comedic. And that was the problem with the first cut, is it wasn't one thing, but it wasn't the other. And it didn't have the best elements of either of those things. And so we thought, well, we need the best elements of one of them. And what we decided ultimately was we can kind of pull this back a little bit and make it more of a traditional doc, or we could go farther and make it more of a comedy, make it more of a film. And we decided the second option. And we even went out and filmed more stuff. We had a couple of other ideas for scenes that we said, okay, if that's what this is going to be, if this is going to be not a traditional documentary, we got to go all the way. And we went out and filmed a couple other scenes just to build out that aspect of the film.
Yeah, so this character that you are in the movie is someone who's everyman naive in a way, right? I mean, what you're doing, at least to some degree, is asking stupid questions. And I used to encourage my students, by the way, in my seminars to ask stupid questions, assuming they were paying attention, right? Because if you have a question and it's a genuine question, the probability that 80% of the people around you have the same question is very high. Assuming you're paying a certain amount of attention. And so you have this character, and correct me if I have any of this wrong in your estimation, who's butting his head up against what a very large number of people seem to presume is self-evident, but is actually preposterous. And you allowed the people that you were talking to in both cases to put their foot in it, so to speak. And so I'm curious first if you think that's a reasonable characterization of what you're doing, but then I'm also curious, you play a kind of, it's like a Bugs Bunny character in a sense. Like there are these trickster characters in mythology that are troublemakers because of their, what would you say? Yeah, it's like the kid who says the emperor has no clothes. And so you're playing that, and you're playing it with a comedic edge, and it can also be pretty harsh. Are you surprised that you ended up in the domain of comedy, that you ended up making movies, that you ended up becoming, I mean, you're a documentary star now. What do you think about all that? And do you think that was a reasonable characterization of what you've been doing?
I think it's a reasonable characterization. Yeah. Well, it's the first time I've gotten a comparison to Bugs Bunny, so that's a new one. But I'll take it. And I think Emperor Has No Clothes. Certainly, I think that's very much what we're trying to do, especially with the first one, but with both movies. I think that's just a lot of what I do in general is pointing out the obvious. And
maybe that's a conservative function. I wonder if that's a conservative function, pointing out the obvious.
I think it is. And if we lived in a culture that was not hopelessly perhaps not hopelessly, but was not deeply confused about so many basic things, then I might be out of a job entirely, which is fine. I'll go do something else, even though I'm not qualified for anything else. So I think that's an accurate characterization. I did not expect, if you'd asked me 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I didn't think that I'd be out making documentary films. Being involved in doing something comedic, doing comedy, doesn't surprise me. I think that probably surprised other people who'd been watching me more than it surprised me. Because I know I have a sense of humor, and that's how I like to approach things. But the problem is that when you're doing, in particular for me, when I first started out podcasting, there's always the risk of, with political commentary, whether it's podcasting or cable news or anything, with political commentary, there's always the risk of it being entirely humorless. It's hard it's hard to involve humor in daily political commentary, and so it gets very dry, very kind of scolding and boring, frankly, after a while. And so I think especially early in my kind of commentary podcasting career, I think I was falling into that. It just wasn't funny. It wasn't fun. And so I was looking for ways, like what are some more interesting ways to get these same ideas across instead of just staring into a camera and saying it. And that's where
you don't want to underestimate the utility of wit and play. You know, when I was lecturing at Harvard, I lectured about very serious topics. You know, I mean, the most serious topics that I had encountered. You know, political catastrophe, atrocity, authoritarianism, brutality. You know, and I had this little voice in the back of my head all the time that told me that if I was a real master of that, I would be able to do it with a light touch. And I thought that was pretty preposterous when talking about things like the Soviet atrocities, you know. But what I came to realize over a very long period of time was that if you're a master of something, you do it in a spirit of play. And that play gives you some leeway, because that's partly what play means. But it also means that you have that leaven of wit that stops you from being a scold. You know, when I first encountered Rush Limbaugh, this is quite a while ago, 30 years ago probably, I went down to California, and that's where I first heard him. And I knew a little bit. I knew about the fact that he was a conservative commentator and that he was causing the progressive types a fair bit of misery and grief. But you know, when I first heard him, I thought that he was essentially a comedian. And there isn't a more effective mode of social commentary, I don't think, than comedy. That's partly what makes Rogan so effective, and it's also so surprising. You know, if you think about it, how many of the top-rated podcasters were stand-up comics? It's a lot of them, right? Constantine was, Dave Rubin was. There's a lot of people. Theo Vaughn, obviously. Joe, of course. So there is a real art to bringing in the right amount of wit and play. And that seems to be one of the reasons that your documentaries were so successful. I mean, you're a funny kind of comedian because you're kind of poker-faced like Buster Keaton, you know? You're not tremendously animated and extroverted. And Buster Keaton was absolutely remarkable at that. I mean, he kept a straight face no matter what he was doing. And that's also a funny part of the character that you play, because your facial expression is generally pretty flat. And that, I think that amplifies the absurdity of the situations that you put yourself in. And I'm kind of also curious with regards to the absurdity of those situations. I tried to put myself in your place when I was watching your movies, and I thought, Jesus, I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I could have stood the social pressure and the, what would you say, the contempt, that was directed towards you by these ideologically addled neo-Marxist, postmodern, progressive types, but you seem to be able to withstand that with no problem. And I'm not sure exactly why. How do you manage that?
When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, it can feel incredibly overwhelming. She wants to make the right choice, but may feel pressure from society or those around her, suggesting her unborn child isn't yet a life. That's where Preborn steps in. Their mission is simply to love these women and help them see that choosing life is possible, creating what can truly become an eternal moment. Take Stephanie's story. She was scared and didn't feel worthy of support, but after receiving compassion and care at one of Preborn's partner clinics, everything changed when she saw her baby on an ultrasound. That moment transformed her outlook completely. Today, she'll tell you her 5-year-old son is her greatest blessing. By supporting Preborn, you can help fund free ultrasounds at pro-life clinics across the country, empowering more mothers to choose life. A monthly donation of $28 can make an eternal difference. Want to get involved? It's easy. Just dial #250 and say baby, or visit preborn.com/Jordan. Your gift is tax deductible and genuinely life-changing. Again, that's preborn.com/Jordan to donate today.
I think I have the advantage in those encounters because it is awkward and it's often unpleasant, as you would expect. I think as any human being who's not a total psychopath would be uncomfortable in a lot of those kinds of situations. The advantage that I have is I know what we're doing and I know what this is for. And so I just have that in my mind the whole time. Like, we got to get the footage. Here's what we need out of this scene. And that's how even though it's a documentary, we're approaching all these things as this is not a segment of a documentary. This is a scene in a film. And so I know generally what we got to get out of it. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. So I don't know. We don't know precisely what the scene is going to be, but we know where we want to put this in the film and what we want to get out of it. And so knowing that allows me to endure these really intensely uncomfortable situations because all in my mind, I'm only thinking, this is going to be great for the movie. Oh, that was a trailer moment. You know, in the moment while we're doing it, I'm thinking like that'll go in the trailer maybe. And I don't know, it just helps me kind of psychologically get through it. The point is, if there was no camera there and it was not a performance, and I'm sitting in a room, for example, with 10 people, I'm not going to stand up and call attention to myself and make the situation awkward. Intentionally, I would not do that, but for the purpose of a film, yeah.
Right, and so these people also know that it's being filmed, and so what you're doing, okay, that explains it to some degree to me because it means that you're sort of straddling the line between real life and dramatic performance, right? Because it's an investigation, but it is also an act, and then because the people who are being filmed know they're being filmed, they're also straddling that same line. And I guess that's also helping me understand, like, to what degree, what was your attitude towards the people in the moment and then later who revealed themselves so unpleasantly and awkwardly on camera? I mean, I'm thinking particularly maybe of the scene with Robin DiAngelo, where she was enticed or tempted into making a reparation offer in cash on the spot. I mean, that's a pretty damn awkward situation. And I had real mixed feelings when I was watching it. I mean, part of my feeling, I'm not a Robin DiAngelo fan, to put it mildly. I think she's done an unbelievable amount of damage. But the agreeable part of me, which is pretty characterological, nonetheless felt bad for her watching her make a mockery of herself in that manner and having that captured. And so I'm wondering, like, this isn't a criticism, it's a genuine question. I'm wondering what you thought about the moral propriety of doing that. Let me preface that with a brief story. I had to dispense with some people in my lab at one point when I was a professor, and I was having a hard time steeling myself to fire them. And I talked to one of my friends who's kind of a professional at that, about how he dealt with the emotional consequences of having to fire people. And he gave me a pretty good 5-minute spiel about why he actually enjoyed it. And his attitude was that he was sent into corporations to find people who kissed up and kicked down and who took all the credit and did none of the work and did nothing but cause trouble and backbite and bicker and gossip and pretend to be working and sabotage. And he'd find out who they were and tell them and send them on their way. You know, and that was a very different attitude than the one I would have taken, because I tend to be, overly sympathetic to people, arguably. And so, but I felt that same tension, watching your movies. And so I'm wondering, you explained that to some degree because you're playing a part and there's a movie being made. And so there's a sense of fiction about it. But personally, like you obviously didn't do Robin DiAngelo any good on the reputational side. And I'd say that was the case with many of the people that put themselves in your films. So what do you make of that, Matt?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely a fair question. I don't think we certainly didn't do Robin DiAngelo any favors. I like to think that we played a hand in totally destroying her career and reputation. I'd be happy if we did. And maybe that kind of answers your question. I go into this, so it's kind of two things in my mind that help me through it. One is I'm playing a character. This is a movie, I'm playing a character, which is actually why, I'll get to the second part of it, but the hardest part for me making these movies is the part before the cameras turn on, because in real time, I'm obviously in the room with these people before the cameras turn on, sometimes after the cameras are off, because that's just the way it goes into making it. And I have to be in the character the whole time, obviously. So the hardest part for me is actually the part you don't see. It's where the camera's not even on yet, and yet I have to kind of stay in this performance, but it's not being watched. And that makes the performance harder. For example, one of the more difficult things that I've done in either movie was when we went to in What Is a Woman, we went to the Maasai tribe in Kenya. And the whole idea was just to present, anyone who's seen the movie or seen that scene, that the idea is we're presenting these insane left-wing, very Western, modern, liberal ideas to someone far outside of that bubble to see how they react to it. And the scene only works if they think that I really am confused about this. We're asking these basic questions about what is a woman, can a woman have a penis? Like these kinds of things. We get great reactions out of them because they really think that I'm confused. And so what that meant is that, and we spent all day with them and we only filmed a little bit of it. So I had to pretend the whole time that I was this totally clueless, insane person. And at no point did I ever turn to them and say, hey, by the way, this is just for cameras. Because if I do that, then it's not authentic. We don't get their authentic reaction. It's the same thing in Air, in Am I Racist? Very similar. The most difficult scene there was we went to a biker bar at one point with a bunch of white Southern bikers at this biker bar. And we get a couple of great interactions that you see on camera. But I was at this biker bar for a while, maybe a couple of hours. And we had a lot of conversations that we didn't film. And I'm wearing this dumb wig and everything. And at no point can I turn to these guys and say, hey, by the way, this is all for show. So they thought that I was this total tool the entire time. And I had to kind of stay in that character. So that was the hard part is so I'm kind of, when I get there, I'm just like begging for the cameras to turn on. I just want to get the thing. I want this to be real. It's a performance. Let's do this. I don't want to have to keep dragging this out in this little mini film that we're making that no one's ever going to watch. Now, the other part of that is, so that's part of how I sort of deal with it. The other part is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make a film, but we're also trying to expose something. We're trying to expose people who are responsible.
Frauds.
Right, frauds.
Yeah, definitely. Deep, self-aggrandizing, naive,
right,
moralizing, hyper-agreeable, deluded, reputation-savaging, cancel culture frauds. Right.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly what we're trying to expose. So there's a kind of righteous indignation that I feel the entire time. I know that, okay, you're going to get what's coming to you. You deserve this. You need to be exposed. This is the only way it will happen, because if I sit down with you and I say, hey, come on my podcast and let's talk about it, first of all, you won't come. And even if you do, you won't be honest about what you really believe. So you force me. The only way for me to show the world what you really believe and what you're profiting off of is to do it this way. And so you brought it on yourself. And that's the way that I look at it, which is one of the things, we talk about stylistically, something like Borat is an inspiration, or even Nathan Fielder. And I think that Borat's a brilliant film. Nathan Fielder's a brilliant, it's just an artist. But with both of those guys and the different things that they've done, films and movies, they are often embarrassing and exposing just normal people. And they're making normal people look like absolute fools. And so we knew going in with both of these films and any films in the future that we don't want to do that. And so if we're doing a scene with normal people, then I have to be the butt of the joke. And so when we're with the Maasai tribe or when we're with the bikers, they're not going to be the butt of the joke. We're not going to put anything on camera that makes them like some random guy, some random just plumber who lives in Tennessee. He's got to live with this embarrassment for the rest of his life. I'm not going to do that. And so the comedy in those scenes was always that I'm the fool, and they come off quite well and the comedy is them being normal and me being the fool. We only wanted to make a fool out of somebody if they were a fraud who needed to be exposed, and so that's how we try to approach it.
Right. So let me ask you one more psychological question about that. So you talked about exposing people and exposing fraud and a certain amount of righteous judgment. I've been thinking hard about the use of anger because anger is a very powerful motivational state. It involves an admixture of negative and positive emotion. The negative is sort of defense preparation, and the positive is assertive approach. And it's very physiologically activating. And it's one of the sources of energy that I draw on when I'm lecturing, especially spontaneously, But it's a tricky thing to manage because too much of it makes you hectoring and finger wagging and self-righteous. And too little of it kind of makes you insipid. Now, you talked about your stance of judgment, with regard to the people that you were exposing. And so is it possible for you to characterize the emotional inputs into that sense of judgment? Because you're making the case that you used your belief that you were uncovering fraud and malfeasance, which I believe to be the case, by the way, and that justified cornering people who you couldn't talk to otherwise and actually exposing them for what they were doing. And is it reasonable to presume that the emotional source that you're drawing on there is anger? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think certainly. There are probably other emotions that go into it, but I suppose in a way, anger is the main one. Now, we are making a comedy, so it's sort of a weird mixture. And anger isn't funny. And this is one of the reasons why SNL was not funny for very long. I think it's gotten a little bit better, but one of the reasons why it has not been funny for a long time, one of the reasons why a lot of these political comedians haven't been good, the late night hosts aren't funny. In my mind, it's because they're too angry and they just despise, and maybe anger is not the right word, it's resentment. They resent the people they're making fun of. They resent Trump so much that it's not.
Yeah,
it's
resentment's
not, right. It's not.
Resentment's a bad one.
Right.
Resentment's a very dangerous emotion. Yeah.
And it's hard to get comedy out of it. It's hard to. Now,
yeah, it is.
Anger can be justified, but it's hard to find comedy out of you being angry. So there has to be a certain sense of. You can't take yourself too seriously. That's what's one part of it.
Yeah,
like there are stand-up comedians who part of their whole shtick is that they're angry about stuff and they're ranting.
Yeah, they're raging. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, rage comedy. I've seen quite a bit of that.
Yeah, and that can be really funny.
Yeah.
Bill Burr back in the old days was really. These days, I don't think he's as funny as he used to be. Not nearly. But back in the old days, he was really good at that. He'd rant about something and it was really funny. But he's not taking himself too seriously. So I think that's part of it. And so it helped me. So I had this anger and we're trying to expose these people. I'm also wearing this dumb wig and I'm playing this character. So I'm not taking myself too seriously either. And so somewhere in there, we're able to get comedy out of it. But underneath all that, yeah, there is anger. And I think that, I guess I don't agree with the assessment that a lot of people would have that, one of the big problems in our society today is there's too much anger. Everyone's angry. I don't think that's the problem at all, actually. I think if anything, there's not enough anger, not enough real anger anyway. Or at least people aren't angry about the right things. I think there should be a lot more.
Yeah, well, discrimination matters.
Right.
Like targeting matters, yes.
And I think that not to take it too far off the movie, but this is one of the problems with cancel culture, let's say, that, okay, we're going to gang up and destroy somebody's life. And it's easy to say, oh, it's an angry mob destroying someone's life. The thing that has always troubled me about that whole scene that we've seen unfold so many times is that actually the mob isn't even that angry. They seem like they're kind of enjoying it. They seem, if anything, at best indifferent to the person that they're trying to destroy. I actually don't think that there's actual anger behind it. So I would say that anger is not
more, maybe the horror of it is the casualness.
Exactly, yeah.
And the delight.
Yes.
Casualness and joy.
Exactly. Yeah, the sadistic glee that people, the glee that people find in, okay, we're going to rip this person to shreds. And so I don't think it's anger most of the time.
Make no mistake, those working to undermine our nation prefer you weak. They desire your passivity, exhaustion, and dependence because confident, self-sufficient individuals resist manipulation. That's why I'm here to talk to you about America's #1 creatine from Beam. They're a great company, they're an American company, and we work with them because they're built on the same principles we care about. Hard work, results, and they've built a product that delivers. The elites mock things like creatine. They dismiss it, bury it under nonsense headlines, or try to convince you it's only for bodybuilders. But here's the truth. Creatine is one of the most well-researched, effective, and safe supplements on the planet. It supports strength, brain health, and longevity. But like everything else, the quality matters. And Beam Creatine is just that, high quality. They don't use fillers, they don't use sugar, nothing synthetic, just clean, pure creatine backed by science and used by people who care about staying mentally sharp and strong. To celebrate real American strength, Beam is offering up to 30% off their best-selling creatine for a limited time. This deal is only for a limited time, so act now. Go to shopbeam.com/Peterson and use code Peterson at checkout. That's BEAM.com/Peterson and use code Peterson for up to 30% off. They don't do these sales often. It's the lowest price offered anywhere for a product this high quality, so go over to shopbeam.com/Peterson and use code Peterson for up to 30% off.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. Okay, so I know you can't speak specifically about the projects that you're working on, although we've obliquely referenced them. You put your finger on two questions of sufficient general interest to generate a fair interest in or a fair audience, a great audience really for your documentaries. Can you tell me what issues you believe are of that level of concern presently? And maybe we can use that as a segue into a broader conversation. I mean, I've been trying to puzzle out since Trump took office exactly what the role of the kind of more political commentary that I was doing on my podcast now is. Because as you know, and like you, I've been a fervent adversary of the woke, cancel culture, progressive, Marxist, resentful, race-baiting mob for, 10 years. And there's been some victories achieved, great victories achieved in the last couple of years. Like, well, for example, it looks to me like the back of the climate apocalypse narrative has been broken. It's still dangerous. The guy who just got elected in Canada, Mark Carney, the new prime minister, he's a net zero advocate. And the Labour Party is still pushing that in the UK, and Europe's still possessed by it. But it's really half the people online now, I think, know it's a scam. And you can say that quite publicly, like I just did, without, risking your professional neck. The whole podcast that I did with Joe Rogan, when I first really broadly broached the climate narrative problem, that was submitted to the College of Psychologists as a complaint against my license, and they upheld that as a valid complaint. So in any case, that's changed, and Trump was elected, and there's a conservative sweep, and at least in the United States, and in the UK, the Reform Party just did extremely well at the level of council elections, and I don't know what you think about the AfD in Germany, but, and I presume they have their problems, but there's certainly conservative voices being heard in Germany and in France and in Sweden and in Italy and in Hungary and in Poland. And so the question is now, what do you think the crucial issues are for conservative commentators like yourself, and maybe even more broadly for the Daily Wire? And where's your interest gravitating with regards to what kind of issues you want to focus on and comment on?
I think that there are some issues that we've been intensely focused on that, to your point, will become a little bit less relevant because maybe the left is slowly backing away from them a little bit, at least for now. And maybe they'll rear their ugly heads again in the future in some other form. So I think that is happening. But I also think that the proclamations of the death of wokeness were premature. They were premature. I don't think that wokeness is dead. I don't think that, and maybe we'll come up with a different name for it. The name doesn't matter that much. But whatever you want to call it, leftism, let's just say more broadly, it's not going away. They're not just going to pack up their stuff and leave. They're still here. So the fight very much continues. It's just that it moves away from some of these. Like, so for example, you mentioned climate change. The trans issue is still really important, but I do think that we've really had one cultural and now even legislative and even judicial victory after another, with more to come. I think the Supreme Court's going to rule very soon in favor of the Tennessee law banning child castration. I think that's going to happen. So we are winning on that issue. We're gaining ground, and I don't want to speak famous last words and all that. I don't see how the trans activists can regain the ground they've lost, because the trans activists, a lot of their progress was based on not having persuaded people that they were right. They never really persuaded anyone. They had scared everyone into being quiet. But in the last couple of years, what's happened culturally is that people have realized that, there's nothing to be afraid of. I can stand up and say, yeah, like there's men and women, only women have babies. Yeah, of course you don't let men in the women's room, that's crazy. Don't let men on women's sports. Don't do that to kids, with these drugs and surgeries. So people aren't afraid anymore, and they realize that they can just say that. And I don't think you can put that toothpaste back in the tube exactly if you're a trans activist. So I think that issue is still important, but it recedes a little bit in a good way because we've been so victorious. So then it goes to your question of, well, what are the battlefields left to fight on? And I think in some ways the battle becomes more fundamental. Maybe not more fundamental because the question of biological sex is about as fundamental as it gets.
Yeah, it's pretty fundamental.
It's pretty fundamental.
Yeah, that's kind of a foundation. Yeah. That one.
But there are other foundational issues, and I think the fight moves to there. Big things like protecting the family. What are the institution of the family? What are the forces that are destroying marriages or convincing people to not get married in the first place? The birth rate is declining. We still have millions of babies being killed by abortion every year. So what are the, that's a battlefield. Now, it's always been a battlefield, but I think that there's even an even greater focus on that. What are the forces that are driving that? I think one of the big forces, if we were to put a label on it, is feminism. And I think that if I were to, put on my Nostradamus hat and try to predict, I think kind of the latter half of the 2020s, that feminism and the war of the sexes and these sorts of things, I think that becomes a focus in the way that LGBT and trans were, say, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, well, the fact that men and women are so split, especially when they're young, in their political affiliation worldwide, and that split seems to be growing, it is evidence for exactly that claim. Like, there's a real reckoning that needs to be had with regard to the resentful feminists, because it is an ethos of resentment like Marxism. Also, Matt, I think that wokeness per se won't ever go away, because I think it's the political expression of immaturity. I think the reason that Marxism and its enviousness and its resentment and its preposterous naivety is so difficult to eradicate, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, is because immaturity has its political expression. Like, one of the things psychologists knew, by the way, is that this is how it's been phrased. People become more conservative as they get older. It's like, that's one way of looking at it, and there is plenty of evidence for that. But another way of looking at it is that conservatism is the expression of maturity. And conservatism is something you have to learn. You know, whereas that notion of equitable distribution and something that's for everyone, that's like native to a family ethos, right? Even Ben Shapiro told me that he was a communist with regard to his own children. You know, so I think one of the ways to understand what's happening is that there's always a war against immature political movements, you know, with their insistence on immediate self-gratification and sexual identity. It's the golden calf worship, you know, orgiastic golden calf worship. And it's just immaturity. And so it's never going to go away. It just finds different guises. And then with regards to this family and feminism thing, my wife and Janice Fiamengo is a really good source on this, by the way. She was an English professor who woke up about 20 years ago and decided that what she was teaching was destroying young men and became a real scholar of feminism and a real critic. The feminists, the hardcore feminists, they were cluster B types, psychopathic narcissists, ruled by nothing but resentment. It's a movement. The more you look into feminism as an intellectual movement, and into the historians of feminism, for that matter, who haven't done their job at all, the more pathological you see it is. It's really the expression of resentment. You can see that in Betty Friedan's book, you know, that famous 1960s work where she complained about the boring lot of suburban housewives. You know, I mean, really, those people had time on their hands and wealth. And all they could do is complain about how bored they were and how that was oppressive. You know, that's pretty bloody pathetic, you know, when you're putting a book like that out in a world of people who are struggling to make ends meet. I have too much free time and I don't know what to do with myself. It's like, that's because the whole patriarchal structure is corrupt. It's like, yeah, maybe you could have a little gratitude. And then look what it's done on the family side. It's absolutely catastrophic, right? I mean, you know, the stats now, 50% of Western women are childless at the age of 30. Half of them will never have a child. And 90% of them will regret it. So 1 woman in 4 is already doomed in our culture to long-term isolation and childlessness. And it hasn't even become an issue of public discussion. You know what's going to happen to those women as they age and they have no one to protect them? Boy, they're fodder for psychopaths in nursing homes and hospitals, I can tell you that. Because no one will be paying attention to them and taking care of them. So, yeah, this is a big deal, the family and the feminist issue.
Yeah. And
what else, Matt? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think that's that what when you talk about resentment driving feminism, that's also something people don't understand, that that's been the case with feminism basically from the very beginning. From the very beginning. Right. It was all, so we have this idea, even conservatives have this idea that that feminism started out as a wonderful thing and then it went off the rails at some point. And my answer to that has always been, you know, before you even do any research into the history of feminism, which you should, you have to ask yourself a question, which is, okay, if a movement can go off the rails in a matter of decades, to the extent that it goes from something quote unquote good to, before you know it, it's justifying the mass slaughter of infants, doesn't that tell you that there might be something wrong with that movement fundamentally? Like if it could go that wrong that quickly to that extent, then obviously there's something fundamentally wrong with this thing. And it's because feminism from the very beginning saw the family as a patriarchal...
As an enemy.
Right, yeah. As a patriarchal, oppressive structure, inherently destructive. We want to destroy this thing that human society is based on and founded in. We want to destroy this thing that human civilization... human civilization itself has been based on this thing, which is the family, since the beginning of civilization.
It's based on monogamy. Yeah, well, the idea that monogamy is intrinsically oppressive to women is as backward as the idea that a man can become a woman. It's utterly insane. You know, we know this even, Matt. You know, imagine that there are men who prefer long-term relationships and who seek that in a dating partner, and men who prefer like one-night stands. Okay, it's easy to identify those groups of men. Well, then you can profile them in terms of their personality. And so what do you find, lo and behold? The short-term maters are Machiavellian, psychopathic, narcissistic, and sadistic. Right. So you start a sexual revolution because monogamy is intrinsically oppressive to women. You punish the men who are actually in it for the long run, and you privilege the manipulative psychopaths. You know, that's not a good outcome. That's not a good outcome. And it is absolutely the case that, because I've looked into the history of feminism in some detail, and Janice Fiamengo is a very good source for this, by the way. It was psychopathological from the beginning. Some of the main players were like literally carnival grifters. You know, it's completely awful. And it isn't only the claim that the patriarchy is essentially oppressive and that the war between men and women is eternal. It's also envious. And there is hardly a worse sin than envy. It's like, men have it so easy. It's like, no, I don't think so. And I don't think women have it particularly easy either. But to make the radical claim that one sex is somehow privileged over another in a fundamental way, and that both aren't playing a causal role in that, it's so preposterous. I want to tell you all why my team and I founded Peterson Academy. First, it's because the technology is there. It's now possible to identify and gather the greatest lecturers and thinkers alive today, and to put them in a position where they can offer their best to all who are interested. Second, advanced education is far more expensive than necessary. Students who complete a 4-year degree risk crippling themselves with debt just when they're starting their lives and their careers. Third reason, because of ideological and institutional corruption. I watched that process painfully unfold for 40 years at McGill, at Harvard, at the University of Toronto. What's the alternative at Peterson Academy? Well, we have 40 stellar professors on board. We have 34 8-hour courses taught at the highest level of quality and with maximum efficiency. And there's much more to come. Find your purpose, sharpen your wit, and bring to bear on your own life the knowledge being offered to you by the best in the world. Go to petersonacademy.com for the details. Enroll and change your life. You know, even in these cultures, these Islamic cultures where women are oppressed, and they are, old women do plenty of the oppressing of young women. Right? It's not a man-only thing. You know, I know in Ayaan Hirsi Ali's family, for example, her exposure to genital mutilation was a consequence of her grandmother when her father was gone. And that's not atypical. The old women like to keep the young women in check, and they have their reasons. So that's the evil queen motif in fairy tales, by the way. The poisoned apple deliverer. Right? That's women and not men. So, okay, so family, feminism, what else?
And I think that's a big one. I also think that, and there's other issues that will remain incredibly important, issues like immigration. And I think, but then also, you know, there's the issue of race. And I think we like to think that we had our moment of racial madness back in 2020 that lasted a couple of years, and we've moved past it. And I think that we have not at all. If anything, it might even be worse now. And so that's something that we're going to have to reckon with that. We're just going to have to reckon with it, because you look at even what's happened in the last couple of months, where you had, for example, the Carmelo Anthony case, where this is a kid.
Yeah, that was insanity.
Right.
Eh?
There's a kid.
Jesus.
Stabbed a black kid, stabbed a white kid in the heart. All the available information we have makes it very clear that this was not an act of self-defense. And yet, you know, this kid raises $500,000, if not more at this point, from people that are giving him money as a reward for stabbing a white kid. Now, and by the way, it's happening.
Yeah, that's not a good precedent.
It's not a good precedent. It's happening again right now. There's a Rodney Hinton Jr., I believe is his name, and is a black guy, and his son was killed by the cops because his son was stealing a car and had a gun, brandished the gun at the cops, got killed. It's sad. That's what happens when you brandish a gun at cops in the middle of committing a felony. And so Rodney Hinton Jr. the next day goes and finds a random white cop who's a retired cop directing traffic, runs him over and kills him. And he also now is being celebrated in some corners of social media There was also a fundraising campaign for him. Now that was on not Give, Send, Go, but the other one. I forget the name of it. GoFundMe. GoFundMe took it down. But the point is, now we have 2 cases in the span of like a few weeks where you have a black murderer who is being rewarded, or they're trying to reward him for killing a white person. So what that tells you is that we got a real issue here, and it's not just going to go away. And the issue is, you talk about resentment, hatred. There's a lot of it bubbling there, and a lot of it is targeted at white people. And of course there is. Like this has been programmed into people from birth. This is you've got kids that are going to public schools where whiteness is talked about as literally a disease. I mean, you have academics who write articles about how to cure the disease of whiteness. So there's a consequence to that. There's a consequence to treating a group of people that way. And I think that
that Marxist envy, right? You divide the world into oppressed and oppressor.
Exactly.
Identify with the oppressed, and then the ultimate extent of that, and there's a feminized element of this, which is all perpetrators are actually victims, right? I mean, that's how they treated criminals in the Soviet Union. The actual criminals were victims of the state. That was the official doctrine. They tortured and tormented the political prisoners far more than the actual criminals, because the criminals were destined to their criminal status by their oppression or their oppressed status in relationship to the state. Yeah, and you're right, that narrative is being taught to kids nonstop. Well, that's a place where the conservatives have fallen down so terribly. It's just appalling. You know that half the American state budgets are K through 12 education? Half. Right? And so, and that's just government subsidy for the worst academic discipline, which is education. The worst faculty, the worst students, the most radically progressive. And conservatives have just rolled over, with the possible exception of homeschooling, and let that happen. And so you're pointing to how that underlies this terrible emergent racial tension, which is also being fanned by the psychopaths, right? Like the people who are raising money in the aftermath of committing a crime. And then you have all these hand-waving, dim-wit, progressive, liberal moralizers who say, well, every perpetrator is a victim, and of course we have to support the oppressed. Even, like you said, in these terribly egregious cases where some high school kid got stabbed. So yeah, okay. That's a big problem. We were doing pretty good in the 90s with regard to racial matters until it became an intellectual shibboleth to stir the pot. Goddamn universities. I tell you, man.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to judge, at least for me, because I was a kid in the 90s. And obviously, like, the OJ trial was in the 90s. LA race riots. It was not a racial utopia by any means. But it seems like it was not how it is now, and it also,
it was damn near a racial utopia in Toronto.
Yeah, in particular compared,
and it isn't like that now,
right? And compared to how it is now, and it's there's a lot that goes into it, but part of it is that there are people that are invested in keeping the oppressor versus victim narrative going. Not just people; it's the most powerful institutions in the country are keeping that
like
going.
Harvard, like Columbia,
right.
Yeah, like all the universities. Yeah, it's appalling. It's appalling, Matt. And that's going to be a big mop-up operation because, as you mentioned, Harvard changed its diversity office's title. But they kept the same people. And there's nothing slipperier than a radical progressive with language. I think they call it community and I don't know what, some bloody horrible combination of cliched words, community and well-being or something, that should just make you gag if you have a bit of sense. But it's the same old players. I think the universities are they cannot be fixed. They cannot be fixed. I just did a podcast on that topic and I looked into the data and the stats. The 3% of the faculty at maximum at Harvard regard themselves as conservative, and it's worse among the administrators. And the typical faculty member and administrator is not centrist American, where that 80% of Americans sit. They're progressive. How the hell do you fix an institution that's riddled from top to bottom with progressives and that's gerrymandered its hiring, promotion, and publication processes to privilege the woke mob?
Right, and there's no incentive. There's no incentive for the university system to fix itself, because they know that no matter what they do, millions of American parents are going to shuffle their kids into this university system and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for the privilege to do so, regardless. And so we're going to complain about how woke and liberal and left-wing the university system is, and yet we're still sending our kids there. And so if you're the university system, what reason do you have to change anything? I mean, it's the best of both worlds. You can indoctrinate the kids. You can do it openly. You'll still get paid.
And you can make a fortune.
You can make a fortune.
Well, Harvard has seen a precipitous drop in applications.
Right. Well, and I think we're starting to see this a little bit. That is the only answer. You say that the university system can't be fixed. I agree that it can't be fixed right now. If it can be fixed, it's going to be only by forcing the matter, and you force the matter by not sending your kids there. It cannot be. It cannot be the
and
default.
Not donating.
Right, not donating. It's not the default anymore. So it's not that you would never send your kid, or that a young adult would never go to university system ever again. And there are some professions where we would all agree, like we want to keep having doctors and.
Yeah, maybe you should look at what the medical schools have done to their curriculums. You might think twice about that too. I tell you, man, no doctor is better than a bad doctor. Medical error is the third leading cause of death. Heart disease, cancer, medical error. So you get yourself in the hands of a bad doctor and you are one unhappy camper.
Yeah. And as maybe we'll get to a point where everyone's just going to use ChatGPT and we don't even need doctors anymore. But the point is that if it's not the default option, if the university system knows that, well, we're not just going to automatically send our kids into your clutches, there are other options. And so then maybe they have to start winning. If they want more people to come, then they've got to earn that. They've got to sort of sell themselves. They have to kind of meet our demands a little bit. If they start to see that millions of conservative-minded parents are guiding their kids away from this system, then after a while of that, maybe at some point, some of these universities say, okay, like we got to make some changes, or we're not going to exist anymore. But that's a long-term fix.
Remember the 90s internet? It promised a digital world of equals, free from government and corporate control. Today, that vision feels distant. Our devices are dominated by big tech and advertisers, with companies like Facebook not just showing ads, but potentially influencing what you see and how you vote. The internet was supposed to put you in control and give you freedom to explore. While we've strayed from that ideal, there's still a way to reclaim some of that freedom and privacy with ExpressVPN. Every time you go online, your internet service provider tracks and records everything you do, building a profile that can sell to advertisers and even to government agencies. It's unsettling how we're constantly being watched and influenced online. ExpressVPN also masks your IP address, that unique number that identifies you online, making it harder for these companies to track and manipulate your digital experience. Both our hosts and production teams here at The Daily Wire use ExpressVPN to reroute all their daily activity through ExpressVPN's secure encrypted servers to hide their IP addresses each and every day. They can browse freely without feeling like they're under surveillance. Best of all, it's incredibly simple to use. Just one click, it works seamlessly across all devices, from laptops, smartphones, even smart TVs. And right now you can get up to 4 months free if you go to expressvpn.com/Jordan. That's expressvpn.com/Jordan for an extra 4 months free.
It sure is. Well, I was just at Oxford at the Students' Union there, and although I tell you, the students were on my side, and there was about 300 more of them lined up outside trying to get in. But it was so unpleasant and so corrupted. It was just, it's so sad. It's so sad. I see this with no satisfaction. The same with Harvard, because it was a great place. Matt, let's turn our attention to something a bit more topical to close this out. I know that you've been in a war of words of sorts, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, with James Lindsay. And I just had James on my podcast, and we talked about the danger of psychopaths to the world really, but to the political most particularly. The hypothesis basically being that there is 3 to 5% of the population that's essentially psychopathic, and they gravitate to wherever the power is and utilize it. That can be on the religious front, like the Ayatollahs in Iran, or the Islamists in general, or the false Protestant preachers, for example, that do it for no other reason than to aggrandize themselves. But it also occurs in the political realm. Many of the so-called agitators on the left side, they're just psychopaths using the naivety of young women, for example, for their own purposes. And I'm seeing some of that also emerging more clearly on the right, especially in the form of a particularly pernicious kind of anti-Semitism. And James and I talked about that, and I understand that in the aftermath of that, and perhaps not directly as a consequence of the podcast, you and James have been exchanging words, and I'm kind of curious about that. Do you want to lay that out a bit and tell me what's going on?
Yeah, sure. And I have no issue with James Lindsay. I don't know him. I know of him. Never had any real problem with him. It started with this conversation about I believe it started with the Shiloh Hendrix case, and she was, for anyone who's not familiar, she was the white mom at a park in Rochester, Minnesota, who, as the story goes, there was a black child who supposedly was 5 years old, I think was probably older, stealing something from her purse. Allegedly, she said the N-word to him or around him. That was not clear. She's confronted by a Somalian guy who is not related to the child, who starts shaming her on camera, pulls out his phone, shames her. She repeats the N-word to him defiantly, and then he follows her to her car and says, "I'm going to put this on the internet. I'm going to make you famous." This is just background. I think a little bit of background necessary to get into it. And then at first, this story with this video, and there are things about the story that are very strange. Where were the kids' parents? We still haven't heard from the kids' parents. What's that all about? This Somalian man had been arrested in the past, been arrested for sexual abuse of minors in the past. He's at this playground.
Oh, he sounds fun.
Right. And so there's a lot of things about it. They're claiming he's 5 years old. We see a glimpse of the kid, I think, on camera. He does not look 5. Strange things. So he is an older kid. He's at a playground, no parents, stealing from a purse, allegedly. Like, what's going on there? A lot of strange things about it, but that we still don't have clarity on. Initially, this video gets out, and it follows the trajectory that we're used to with cancel culture, where the mob descends. And it's like I said earlier, the mob, they're not angry at her. There's a sadistic pleasure in, okay, we're going to make this woman famous, and we're going to ruin her life. And so they put her address out. They put her social security number out. They put out where she worked, her phone number. People are calling her, death threats. There are people posting TikToks threatening to assault not just her, but her 1-year-old baby that she had with her. So just
right. There come the psychopaths, right. The people who are keying Teslas, exactly. Resentful to the core, exactly. Cowardly beyond comprehension. Perfectly, yeah.
This psychotic scene that we've seen so many times. This story though takes an interesting turn, because usually what happens in this case, somebody's caught on camera doing or saying something offensive or rude, and yes, saying a racial slur to a child you shouldn't do that. It's bad. Obviously, I would never do it. Most people wouldn't. But usually what happens is they're caught on camera. There's this grotesquely disproportionate response, because even if you shouldn't say a racial slur in a moment of anger, somebody stealing from your purse, obviously you shouldn't say it. Does that mean that your life should be ruined, that you should have to move because of this? Obviously not. And so what usually happens is that the person who's the target of the cancel culture comes out tearfully begging for mercy, which they won't get, by the way. They never do. In this case, the woman doesn't do that. Instead, she doubles down and refuses to apologize. She posts a GoFundMe or a Give, Send, Go, and a separate kind of group forms to support her and donate her. And she ends up raising like $700,000 that people are giving money to her. Now,
oh my God!
So this becomes obviously a big controversy online. I didn't weigh in for the first couple of days. It was over the weekend. I'm with my kids. I try not to use Twitter on the weekend. I come back on Monday, this past Monday, and I give kind of my take on it. And my take, which not everyone's going to agree with, you might not agree with it, or maybe you do, I'm not sure. But my take is, look, she shouldn't have used the word, but I am glad that she raised all this money. And the reason that I'm glad is because two reasons mainly. Well, three. The first is that she actually needs it. Like I don't think that her family's life should be threatened over this. And you need to like move now because of this. And so she actually does need the money. But more importantly, this is a rebuke of cancel culture. That's what this really is. This is not, now it would be different, okay? It would be different if she posted the video herself. Like if she did this and was proud of it and posted it and was bragging about it, that would be one thing. Because then the reaction is not really cancel culture. But that's not what happened. This is a third party saying, we're going to ruin this woman's life, not because we're angry, but because we just enjoy it. And so,
to get clicks and attention, and to be a moralizer. Yeah.
In this case, there was a separate group that stood up and said, you know what? We're not going to do that this time because we're sick of this. We went through 15 years of this kind of mob justice, and we're not going to do it anymore. The only way to stop it, this is my case, this is my argument anyway, is to disincentivize the mob. The mob's tactic is, this is their slogan. They said it about this woman, Shiloh. We're going to make her famous. Let's make her famous. And the assumption is that if we make her famous, it will ruin her life. The only way to stop this is if the mob knows that if you make her famous, it might not ruin her life. In fact, it might help her. And so now there's some disincentive to pursue this kind of pitchfork mob justice. And so I saw it as a rebuke of cancel culture. And then secondarily, there's also the other issue that there is just, let's face it, a really absurd racial double standard here, in that she said a bad word, she shouldn't have said it. It's also a word that in the Black community, they use all the time. I mean, this kid probably hears the word 10,000 times a day. And so there's this idea that like, okay, if your skin looks a certain way, you can say this word whenever you want. If your skin doesn't look that way, if you say it, it's so bad, we're going to ruin your entire life. And that's there have been words in the past. Obviously, there are words that are taboo. This is a kind of taboo.
But that's about the only one that's left that's really taboo. All the curse words have lost that, but that one hasn't.
But it's not just the taboo. A taboo word is one thing. I agree that a racial slur should be taboo. I'm not going to use it. Vulgarity should be taboo. I try not to use vulgarity. But this is a taboo that only applies to one group, and then you have another group that it doesn't apply to them at all. And I'm not aware of anything quite like that. I'm not aware of a precedent in any language in human history where there's a word that if one group says it, you can kill them, but if another group says it, it's just a greeting. And like,
right, yeah. Well, the acceptance of that taboo, if you're white and part of the oppressor class, let's say, acceptance of that taboo and justification of it is compliance with the oppressed narrative and a proclamation of your culpability as essentially morally equivalent to a slaver. So it is a really big problem. It's a really big problem, right? It's not trivial.
Yeah. So and that's how I see it. I see it as a big problem. I see what happened with this story as a repudiation of both cancel culture and the racial double standard. It's ugly. As I said when I gave my initial take on it, you wish that she had done something that we could affirmatively defend, like we could defend the action itself. And in this case, we can't and we don't. And yet still, I think that the response was justified and necessary. And as I said at the time, these are ugly things. The racial double standard, the victim-oppressor narrative, the cancel culture, it's an ugly thing. Ugly things die ugly deaths. And there's no other way around it. So anyway, that's a long setup. That was my take on it. And James Lindsay did not like my take. And he responded initially. I did a 20-minute monologue about it. I think his initial response was like a clown emoji or something. Obviously not engaging with my argument, not taking it seriously, but still commenting on it. I don't really appreciate that. I find it's just not helpful. If you're not interested in what I have to say, that's fine.
Yeah, well, your argument is serious. I mean, the counter argument's pretty obvious, which is that she shouldn't be rewarded for her actions. But like both of those arguments stand, you know what I mean? And the question is the nuance in between. Have you thought about talking to Lindsay? I mean, I've found James, you can have a conversation with James, and I'm
here's
wondering. Yeah, go ahead.
Here, the problem is that as this conversation started on X, and I'm perfectly willing to talk to him. I think my argument is rational. I think it's the right argument. Otherwise, I wouldn't be making it. But there are, Ben Shapiro disagrees, and he sees it the other way. He did a segment on his show where he directly responds to my argument, and that's fine. It's perfectly fine. That's great. Like we can disagree. I got no issue with that. And this is an issue where there's a rational argument on either side. I do think that there's a right argument, but the problem is that James Lindsay, his response was at first dismissive, and then eventually he offers this kind of lengthy semi-rebuttal of part of my argument. But then at the end of it, he says that I'm a fool and a dimwit. And so, once you say that, then it's not possible to have a conversation anymore.
No, wait a sec. I don't know, Matt, about that. I mean, because I've been in the thick of so many political arguments, I've had moments of pretty severe dislocation, even with friends, and one of the things I've learned is that, and I'm not trying to lecture you at all, but one of the things I've learned is that, a month of reconsideration and then what would you say, taking the opportunity to actually talk, that's pretty useful, to take a longer view, because people can be stupid. People are stupid in the moment. And the things that James said about you obviously don't seem to be productive, but it would be good, if the conservative side of things could model a bit more wise, sober second thought, and I like James, and I've had productive conversations with him, and he's a force for good, all things considered. And I would say the same thing about you. And it'd be unfortunate to see unnecessary fractures in a side that's already pushed pretty hard to the wall, So, anyways, that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to having a conversation. I'll have a conversation with anybody. I think that. And my feelings aren't hurt. People say worse things about me every single day. Like many of us in this space, we hear it all the time. It's just that it's not, and you can think that I'm a fool and a dimwit. Maybe I am, maybe I am. But if that's your view of it, then it's hard to have a productive conversation because you're going into it saying, well, I don't take your ideas seriously. So then, okay, well, I don't know how I can offer my ideas to you if you don't take them seriously. I'm not sure how we can have a conversation. But if you were to, it doesn't mean that a conversation is not possible. And I do think that there's certainly a conversation here worth having, not just about the Shiloh Hendrix case itself, but I know that, James Lindsay has been, and others have been on kind of this crusade recently about what they call the woke right. And I think that there's a discussion to be had there too, because I think that, my take on it is, I think the label is at a minimum not useful at all. It's not a useful label. Nobody can really even explain what it is exactly. There are, I've asked people over the last week, what does this even mean? I've gotten 10 different answers, which tells you, that's what tells you that you've come up with a term or a label that's not useful, is when no one is very clear on what it actually is.
Well, you know what I think we should do? I think we should, let's talk about this woke right issue on the Daily Wire side. We've got another 20 minutes. We could do 2 things on the Daily Wire side. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about where you see the future of the kind of critical political commentary that you've been doing and that I've been doing, especially in the light of the Trump victory. We fleshed that out a little bit, and you talked about some concerns that you think are part and parcel of the broader culture war that still need to be rectified in a major way. But I think we could flesh that out. And I think we should talk a little bit more about this issue of gatekeeping versus unfettered, this issue of gatekeeping on the conservative side and what that might mean and how that's related to issues, profound issues of free speech. So for everybody who's watching and listening, you can join us on the Daily Wire side and we'll continue this. And Matt, I think we'll bring this to a close. Is there anything you want to say in conclusion before we move to the Daily Wire side?
I guess, we started talking about the different projects and things we have in the works, and I wish I could have said more, but everyone should stay tuned because we've got a couple things that we're working on that, kind of tie in some of the stuff we've talked about, and where's the culture going? What are the big battlefields in the future? And I'm excited about what we're working on. So stay tuned.
Yeah, great. Well, it's really nice talking to you. It's nice catching up. And thank you to the film crew here in Scottsdale and to the Daily Wire for making this possible. And we'll spend another 20 minutes to half an hour on the Daily Wire side talking about the woke right and about the future of conservative political commentary. So looking forward to that. Thanks a lot, Matt. It's always good to talk to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.